4A Games is a group of developers comprised of guys who worked on the Stalker series, and their recent efforts with the Metro games followed along a similar vein, putting the player into some dark, dreary environments with the backdrop of a world gone to hell after a nuclear war. The latest entry in the series is Metro Exodus, a game which I think is going to receive a lot of negativity over some pretty dumb choices made recently by the publishers Deep Silver Software. And that's kind of a shame because it's going to put a damper on what's probably one of the most polished and interesting shooting games to come out in 2019. Before I get started, I just want to say that I don't think this review contains major spoilers, and I even tried to only use footage from the chapters they've already shown in other trailers. But if you're really worried about me spoiling things, well, maybe just listen to this video instead of watching it. Now anyway, if you've played the last couple of games, well then you're pretty familiar with the story at this point. But the abridged version is that the game is set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland after Earth has been ravaged by nuclear warfare. Set in Moscow, the survivors make do the best they can in the many metro stations beneath the surface, avoiding mutants, Nazis, commies, and the kind of people who take photos of their food at restaurants just to put on social media. Yeah, sickos. The hero of the story is a dude named Artyom, one of the Spartan Rangers, a group of guys who are basically rock stars, badass special forces tasked with protecting survivors from bandits and mutants.
A few more scars and you will be completely irresistible to any woman.
After the events of Last Light, Artyom's now married to Anna, the daughter of the high-ranking Colonel Miller, and he's been heading to the surface to try and make contact with someone, anyone, to see if life exists outside of Moscow. But all hope seems lost.
Artyom, the only thing I can hear is that Geiger counter ticking.
Not too long into the game though, Artyom and Anna discover that there may actually be life going on outside of the city and possible survivors to the far east. Because they're so sick of the cold weather and breathing air that's basically just recycled farts, they end up stealing a train, they call it the Aurora, and they all head off with the Spartan Rangers to try and find a better life.
Let's drink to the Aurora!
The game is then made up of this entire journey spanning across 4 seasons, with multiple locations where the train has to stop for various reasons. A big focus of Exodus has gone into the interactions Artyom has with other characters, most notably Anna and her father, as well as the other Spartan Rangers that he's traveling with, and there can be 5 or even 10-minute segments where you're just sitting around or standing around listening to people babble on. This is kind of oddly juxtaposed with Artyom, who never so much as even coughs or clears his throat during any of the cinematics, even though he does narration during the loading screens. Throughout the game, you meet new characters who all end up being dragged along for the ride for various reasons, and you genuinely come to like and care for some of the people in this game. It's a story with a lot of heart put into it, and a great sense of effort has gone into building and establishing the relationships with other characters, especially Anna.
Oh, thank you, Uncle Artyom. Thank you so much.
A big part of what makes this all so captivating is the presentation. Now, most people I think know how good the Metro games look, and Exodus is no exception. The game just looks absolutely stunning and has a really good mix of environments to keep things feeling fresh. Performance-wise, the game ran pretty well for me on ultra settings. I've got 16GB of RAM, an i7 and a GTX 1080, and the only time the frame rate ever dipped all that much was when there were a lot of characters on the screen at the same time. But otherwise it ran pretty well and was smooth and fluid, most importantly during combat. Metro Exodus has something of a slow start, the prologue if you can call it, that goes for well over an hour. And then it's not until a little bit after that where you're finally dropped into the first open worldish environment and can actually start playing the game properly. At this point, I'd say the game is a controlled open world, and by that I mean it is a pretty big map with a few things to see and do outside of the main storyline, but the game doesn't want you to go too far off the beaten path. If you wander too far outside of the map, you'll often be outright killed by something like extreme radiation or some kind of horrible monster. The first place you visit is the Volga River during spring, and it's about as close to a Stalker game as you can get without it being a Stalker game. It even has similar looking skyboxes and electrical anomalies that randomly move throughout the environment, attacking anything that gets too close. Later on you'll head to the dried up Caspian Sea that now looks like it's the backdrop for a Mad Max film. And then later on you'll explore the Taiga Forest with enemy factions that behave like they're the pagans or something from Thief the Dark Project. Either way though, goddamn does it just feel good to get out of those damp, dark metro tunnels for once. And once you let loose in these environments, you can just do whatever the hell you want. There's always some kind of story mission going on in the background, but outside of that, you can just explore to your heart's content. And your curiosity is almost always going to be rewarded. It's not a true open world game with fast travel points or generic outposts, but it definitely has more of a sandbox feel to it than the other games. But if you want to hate on it for just being another open world shooter, well, that hate is going to be misdirected. Like the other games, there's a big focus on managing your resources, and you can craft ammo and items on the fly using this magical backpack that can turn chemicals and scrap metal into things like air filters and throwing knives. Once you find a weapon for the first time, it's then saved in your armory back on the Aurora, and you can even dismantle weapons in the field to recover the attachments for yourself. And there is a fair bit of customization with weapons, adding better stocks, barrels, or magazines. So gun nuts, I think, are gonna love it. There's a bit of micromanaging with ammunition and a weapon's condition, because the worse off a gun is, the more likely it is to be less accurate, and even do less damage. And in some cases it might even jam mid-fight. For my first playthrough of the game, I played through on hardcore mode, which is the second highest difficulty. And I gotta say that I felt like this was the right way to play the game. Items were strict without being too hard to come by, and combat was challenging and punishing enough that I had to make sure I wasn't just running into it like a moron. It's definitely a more action-packed game than the others, and there's more items to accommodate this. But if you've played the other Metro games, you know there's always been a bit of a focus on avoiding combat whenever possible, and this was for a couple of key reasons. The first one being that I think it was just a bit of a drain on the resources, and you couldn't really afford to be getting into gunfights with bandits and Nazis every 5 minutes. Expending all your precious ammunition and medkits just wasn't very good in the long run. Then the other reason was that Metro 2033 on Last Light often kept you accountable for your moral compass, and going through the entire game killing everything you came across didn't really give you the best possible ending. What people might like to know about this one is that you can actually go ahead and kill people in Exodus in certain areas and under specific circumstances, and still keep your karma intact. Like before, you'll come across little outposts or bases where NPCs are hanging out and patrolling, and you can either go in guns blazing or just sneak right through undetected. But this time you're allowed to get into gunfights without any moral ramifications, as long as it's a group of NPCs who have it coming, if that makes sense. So by that I mean bandits, thugs, murderers, and other nasty enemy factions. Like, you're free to kill these guys as much as you want. It's during the other moments where you often have to move through an area inhabited by more innocent NPCs where you're then held accountable for your actions. You see, not everyone or everything, hint hint, in the world of Exodus is a bad guy. The first faction you encounter is a group of religious nutjobs who denounce technology because they think it's wicked. These guys are a little bit unhinged, but they're not outright bad people. At one point you sneak through a port that's controlled by fishermen and traders, and again, these guys haven't really done anything wrong, so they don't really deserve to get a knife in the back of the head. Making your way through these encampments without harming anyone lethally is going to net you that much important positive moral point, which is going to affect the ending. But the good thing is that at any of these bandit camps scattered across the map, you can just go in and gun down or stab dudes to your heart's content. And let me tell you, it sure feels good gunning these assholes down. Playing the game on hardcore means you go down in a couple of hits during shootouts, but enemies do as well, so it makes gunfights really tense and chaotic. And getting these meaty headshots and watching an enemy just drop to the floor never gets old. And yes, you can turn off the crosshair and those hit markers. Exodus also has a somewhat more developed stealth system in the way that you can now control the time of day. So across the maps are these little camps where Artyom can rest his weary head and sleep until either the day or the night time. During the daytime, obviously enemies are going to see you much easier, making stealth a lot harder. But on the positive side, during the day, there's going to be less mutants and other nasty things running around. It's an interesting choice for the player to make, and it can pretty drastically change the way certain events pan out. I gotta say though, I do think the mutants make up the only negative aspects of the game, because Exodus really does take a pretty realistic approach to most aspects, like survival, ammo conservation, and all that kind of stuff. But then it also has that really dumb video gamey shit, like how mutants can jump on you forcing a button mash to get them off. Or there's enemy types that do stupid shit like spitting acid. Or how about a boss fight against an enemy that can survive 20 crossbow bolts to the head? Just kind of feels out of place in a game that's trying to tell this very detailed and thought-provoking story about a group of survivors bonding through hardships, when you've got this kind of dumb stuff that just feels like it's from a generic action game. Kind of dumb too how there's the option to quick save but no control over save slots. If you screw up during combat or stealth for instance and accidentally save over a checkpoint, well, you're kind of fucked. Exodus is a really long game too. It's broken up mainly, as I said before, into seasons and all that, and the Volga chapter alone took me about 5 hours to finish. And that was with exploring every little nook and cranny and trying to do as much stuff as possible. There's some short interim sequences in between getting to the next one set in the Caspian, but even then, this chapter again took me probably another 5 hours as well. And after that, there's still like 2 or 3 more chapters to go. If you're just going to run through this whole thing like a dickhead without taking the time to absorb the game world and get immersed, well, then I guess you could finish it a lot quicker, but that's not really the way the game's meant to be played. And I think that too might be one of the game's biggest downfalls, is that it's a game that really requires a lot of time and patience from the player. Like I said, there's those long segments where you'll often just be sitting or standing listening to people talk for upwards of 10 minutes. It's not the type of game you can just hop into for like 30 minutes to kill some time. I mean, you could if you really want to, but it's going to make things feel disjointed. And the immersion factor, which is what makes these games so good, is just going to be lost, leaving everything feeling kinda hollow. I guess my only other complaint is the move these guys made away from Steam to the Epic Launcher. Now, at first, I didn't really care too much, until I tried to download the game, and my download speed was just horrible, even by Australian standards. Not to mention, Epic Launcher's just really resource hogging and so slow to load in general. Just such a big shame, because even though these problems are niggling, they're really going to overshadow the game, and I think people aren't going to give Exodus the credence it deserves. Some people are even saying that they'll hold off buying this until it's finally back on Steam in a year, which can't be good for business. But look, either way you've managed to get your hands on this thing, I think if you're patient enough and can put up with a pretty slow start, you're really going to dig what Exodus offers up. It makes a pretty big departure, no pun intended, from what the other games were like, but it still keeps it in line with what's made the series so good to date. Being atmospheric environments, a good mix of action and horror, refined stealth and shooting, and just superb storytelling.
Some Satanist I am.
The last chapter of the game, which I won't spoil, is some of the most tense set pieces combined with fantastic writing I think I've seen in a video game in a long time. And the ending is just sublime. I hope this isn't the last we see of Artyom and his band of Spartan Rangers, but even if it is, I'd be pretty damn happy with this as their final outing.